Okay, so I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Lesli Hoey from the Taubman School of Urban and Regional Planning. Her favorite food right now is homemade pot stickers, and she's going to tell us a little bit about eating our way out of climate change, the role of university dining.
So I want to talk to you today about strategies for eating our way out of climate change, or the role that institutions like the University of Michigan can play in facilitating dietary transitions and reductions of food waste. Before we start, let's do a quick poll. So what percentage of all greenhouse gas emissions globally come from food systems, including farm production, land use change caused by expanding agriculture, and supply chain processes? Is it 9 to 14%, 15? The second one should be 15 to 21%, C 25 to 31, or D 35 to 41%. I'm going to let you mull that over. I think we're going to keep it up for a full minute so you can get your answers in. And I'm going to move on, and we're going to reveal the answer near the end of my talk. So you can close your window if it's blocking your view, if you've already answered. So what I can tell you before I reveal that at the end is that consumers and retailers in the US waste up to 40% of the US food supply, and food waste contributes more than a third of food systems emissions. And it's the largest category of US landfill waste, so 22%. This doesn't even account for all of the food packaging and all the single-use plastic waste that's connected to food that also ends up in landfills. We also know that the vast majority of the red meat consumed in the US has more than 50 times the emissions per kilogram compared to plant-based foods. So what kinds of changes am I talking about, and who is responsible? I'm not talking about voting with your fork, where we expect individuals to intentionally choose to eat more sustainably. We all need to do that, but we know as well that not everyone has that choice. So this often is called consumer citizenship, where it only caters to those who can afford to eat more sustainably produced fruits and vegetables. And it just reinforces hierarchies of economic power and often white privilege. I'm talking about actions that institutions and governments can take to make the more sustainable choice an easier choice. So on a macro level, this really is going to require efforts to reduce poverty and to make sustainable food choices more affordable. So requiring shifts in how we invest public dollars and subsidies. Urban planners, like my field, can also affect how and where we produce food and how we distribute it. So they could do things like zoning for urban agriculture, farmland preservation, public transport that connects people to grocery stores, or subsidies for farmers markets and healthy corner stores. In the work that Andy Jones and I did, led with the UN President's Commission on Carbon Neutrality in 2019 and 2020, we focused on two changes our university could make. With the first action area, we focused on scaling up plant-forward food procurement and consumer diets. So we recommended rebranding food items, expanding plant-forward menus, and altering choice architecture to make plant-forward options the more appetizing and the easier choice. So M-Dining, which is pictured here and primarily serves students living in the residence hall, has been implementing these kinds of changes for many years across all their dining halls. And they're still testing out new ideas like those that we suggested, including a study that Andy and I are currently collaborating on focused on choice architecture. But M-Dining only accounts for about, by our estimates, 40% of all the university's food purchases, if you include the Flint and Dearborn campuses and all of the other units that operate separately, such as the unions, strategic catering and vending, athletics, the hospitals, the law and business schools, each of which, unlike M-Dining, which has an in-house food system, dining system, all of these work with Aramark, Sodexo, or Picasso, these really big national companies, to secure their food. So one thing that's related to what we suggested in our report is that Steve Mangan, the director of M-Dining, has been chairing a food workstream group to coordinate the vendors across all of these systems to try to implement similar initiatives to push forward more plant-forward menus. And this is something, this coordination has never been done before. So we're excited to see that moving forward. The second thing that we said in our report is that we really needed to take more actions to reduce and divert food waste across these 3 different campuses and all these dining operations. So in that realm, things that are moving forward include student groups that have been developing more ideas to reduce food waste, to eliminate single-use plastics, and to change contract language to encourage more sustainable procurement. At M Dining, reusable containers are being used for to-go food. Catering continues to offer zero waste events. Food donations have been increasing, and another group is working on how to upcycle certain foods like uneaten bagels and bananas. A carbon neutrality food work group led by the Office of Campus Sustainability has also been meeting for the last year to develop a roadmap for increasing and tracking sustainable food purchases across campus. And M Dining is also leading this work nationally. And I think Robbie, who you're going to hear from, is involved in this, planning a second conference on sustainable procurement, where they're bringing together university dining programs, procurement, manufacturers, and nonprofits leading this work from across the country. So all of these changes to food procurement, consumer diets, and food waste that I just described, I admit sometimes can seem small, but thinking back to the poll, those of you who answered C were correct. And looking at what you answered, okay, about almost half of you chose that, but not all of you were so sure. Some thought it was more, some less. But regardless, a quarter to a third of all greenhouse gas emissions globally coming from food systems is pretty significant. So, and a new United Nations study estimates that emissions from supply chain processes like what I just described are increasing so much that they overtake the emissions from farming and land use change. So the role that institutions play in reshaping this supply chain is more important now than ever. So imagine if all universities, K through 12 schools, childcare centers, hospitals, and other major institutions made this same shift to plant-forward dining and food waste reduction. The images here are of national campaigns, a lot of them started by students, nonprofits, dining directors across the country who are successfully getting their institutions to make these kinds of changes. And as more institutions join the movement, it should drive broader changes in resource use, food waste streams, and agricultural management practices that contribute so profoundly to global greenhouse gas emissions. So my last slide is just a note to all of you students in the audience to continue practicing your advocacy skills to decarbonize the University of Michigan's food system, and then take those skills and influence other major institutions in your communities and try to build a groundswell of momentum that can compel companies and local, state, and federal government to take an even more bold and structural change to make our food systems more equitable and sustainable. Thank you.